All right, welcome everybody to the security webinar on Future Ready, Current Events and Trends with AD360. My name is James Manning. I am a pre-sales engineer here in Panda Security US, and I am going to be your presenter today. To start off, we're not going to go into a lot of details just yet on kind of what the presentation is going to be about today, although it's a little bit obvious. But we have a section we're going to save that for. So just to start off, we want to do a little bit of housekeeping items. And for those of you that have been with us on previous presentations, you'll be familiar with this, but those of you who haven't, just to note that you will not be able to interact with me by voice today, so Q&A and things like that. But at the end, we are going to reserve a couple of minutes and go ahead and try to answer any questions that may come up. You should have the ability through your client, your GoToMeeting client, to be able to enter in questions. So we encourage you to do that. And at the end, we'll get a list of those up, and we will actually go over them. On the presentation. So let's go ahead and get into it. Take a look at the adaptive defense model, sort of a refresher for us all. And then we're going to take a look at both current trends that we've sort of noticed in the industry. And then number 5, the X factor. So we're going to bring that up there towards the end. And then, of course, as we always do, summary, and then we'll move on to your questions. So the introduction for this webinar. This is something that was by popular demand. This was kind of exciting for me because this presentation actually came out of your requests. We had a lot of questions come in from the previous Dawn of Crypto webinar. A lot of people wanting to know, hey, how does Adaptive Defense 360 stand up to the current threats that are out there? That's encouraging for me. Number one, it means that you're engaged, you're joining, but also you're paying attention, you're showing interest in what we're putting out there. But more importantly to me is that you're kind of keep up with what the current threats are, and you're wondering how it is you're positioned against those. So you're not taking sort of a lackadaisical attitude towards your security. You're wanting to know directly from us, hey, where do we stand on some of these things? So that tells me that you have a very proactive approach to your security, and that's encouraging. So that's what we're going to look at today. Is we're going to see how adaptive defense matches up against a few of the current threats that are out there. But another thing that's an important grain to tell is, along with those current threats, we don't want to forget about ongoing and developing trends. It's very important. You always want to kind of keep an eye out on sort of that leading edge of things that are changing or are starting to pop up, that are starting to catch steam. We always want to keep those things tick and make sure that we're protected against them. We are also, as we see here, going to be going outside the fence today. So what does that mean? Well, when we started to get the requests in for this presentation, and I started to think through it, I was like, all right, we need to look at some current threats and put those together. It would have been pretty easy for me to just go back to our very own labs and say, hey guys, give me a list of 5 or 6 threats, whatever, 3 or 4 threats that are current that you guys are seeing, and how we're doing against them. That would have been easy, just very simply because if our labs knows about it, we're going to be protecting against it. So I wanted to do differently. So going outside of the fence means the examples that I'm using today are all going to be from external sources. So these are things that have been found and discovered by other people, other companies, other researchers, which I think is important because it's not something that came directly to us first off. It's out there. It's been in the news recently, so this isn't something that we've kind of dredged up from 4 years ago. This is something that you've likely got across your inbox or alerts or something along those lines. So I thought it'd be important to take something of that nature and really kind of stack us up against it and see how we do sort of in that realm. So that's the approach we're going to be taking. The other part of this, the more we got to thinking about it and kind of putting it together, especially, the interest with your request, with so many people asking the same thing, we thought that this might be a pretty good idea to do as a regular occurrence. We're kind of tossing that around a little bit as far as how frequently we may want to be doing it, but sort of keeping our ear to the ground as far as what is recent, what's out there, what's kind of popular, and always keeping you guys abreast of those situations. So you can always know, maybe at least on a quarterly basis, where you stand. All right. And then lastly, this is something that I really, really want to encourage, is that your feedback gets results. So we spend a lot of time on these. As you know, we're doing these on about a monthly basis. So a lot of time and energy goes into kind of identifying a topic and being able to develop material for that, and all the editing and stuff that goes into it from month to month. It's kind of a compact schedule. So we encourage you guys to give us feedback and to say, hey, look, we would like to hear about this topic or that topic, or so on and so forth. Having that topic right at hand gives us a lot more time to develop things a little bit further and make sure it's something that's really relevant and important to all of you guys. So definitely give us your feedback at the end. So with that all said, let's move into the adaptive defense model. So this is something that we've talked about a lot before. Pretty much every one of these presentations, these webinars, around the whole adaptive defense model. So why do we want to talk about it even more today? Well, we are going to be taking a look at some current threats. We're going to be looking at trends and things like that too. We don't want you to be in the mindset of, when I had an AV product, I always had to wonder, or I always had to contact the vendor and say, hey, are you guys protecting against this? Hey, are you protecting against that? We want to have it fresh in your mind as we go into this discussion, just what kind of technology you are actually benefiting from with adaptive defense. You get to see the whole toolbox that we're actually throwing out there in your defense against a lot of the threats that are roaming around on the internet. So as we go back and visit that model, one of the things I like to call this is sort of simplified expertise, is what we're bringing to you with adaptive defense. The model number one is it's a managed service, as we've discussed before. And why is that important? Managed because you've got a lot of other things to do as administrators, as partners, and whatever your day-to-day may be. You may not always have the ability or the know-how to go in and make quick decisions on individual files and whitelists and so on and so forth. So we're taking all of this heavy lifting off of your shoulders. We're exercising our 27, 28 years of experience in the antivirus industry, all the knowledge that we have gained from that, and we are putting it to your defense. We're making all of the tough decisions for you, but allowing you to have that granularity to control the product where you need to. So big benefit there. The other part of this is process classification. We are classifying each and every process that executes on a machine. Big difference, remember, from AV, which is only looking for none. Adaptive Defense 360 is looking at every single file that runs, and we're going to make a classification on it as whether or not it's trusted, malicious, or potentially unwanted, eliminating that gray area that used to exist on machines the old way. So very, very, very broad and in-depth considerations. The next is execution control. Utilize it. So with execution control, and there are varying degrees on this. Personally, this is the method that I prefer. With execution control, what we're saying is, in order to classify and control these processes, we are going to prevent or control their ability to run on a machine. If it tries to run, we're going to check to see if we know what it is. If we don't know what it is, we're not going to let it execute until we do. Very simple. Out there that claim to be sort of execution control, but what they're doing is they're allowing processes to run for a little bit, doing analysis of them quickly, and then going back and reverting changes or locking them down post-execution. So we're talking about this, we're going to see one of the trends today is leaning towards moving away from processes, at least as the entirety of the attack. So we have stuff out there that's trying to, exploit legitimate applications, to be able to have technology or protections in place that are going to those misuses of things like PowerShell and so on, and be able to shut those down. We also have the advanced visualization tool. As we say here, it's intelligence. It's a broad intelligence. This is going to give you insight into user behavior, network behavior, the precursors to an alert showing up in your console, and understood what took place before that appeared. Intelligence into behavior. And importantly, this is a full EDR solution. So we do have the process classification in there. We're watching for, the manipulations of known good applications. But we also have the traditional side, and that is important because you need that remediation piece. If you get an infected system, that didn't have Adaptive Defense 360 on it to begin with, you need to have something that's able to get in there and pull all that stuff out, get it to a clean state, and be able to protect the machine moving forward. All right? So it's a very robust, very full solution, a lot of capabilities in here. And this is what I want you to keep in mind as we start to go through and look at a lot of the threats today. All of this package is what is protecting you against these threats. So our current threats. The first one we are going to talk about is one called Stalin Locker. I'm not sure the main reason why I included this in here, whether or not it was because it was sort of like a ransomware variant, that's been the big news for a long time now, or if it was like the glowing red eyeball Joseph Stalin face. Kind of reminded me of something I would see on a Mike Myers, like an Austin Powers movie. So that may be why I got included as well. Something was discovered by people called the Malware Hunter team. I think they're most prominent on Twitter than anywhere else. And it is a very, very destructive pseudo ransomware. Why do we call it pseudo ransomware? It's because it does not actually demand a ransom in order to be paid. Most ransomware, it gets on the machine, it encrypts all your data, it prints up a lock screen, and it says, give me X amount of, cryptocurrency, and so much time or you lose your data. Stalin Locker does most of that. It goes through, it encrypts the data, throws up the picture that you see here, but instead it never requests money. It never requests a payment. Instead, what it does is it gives the victims 10 minutes to enter an unlock code. And by the way, I don't think there's any clear disclosure on how to obtain that unlock code, but it gives them 10 minutes to enter an unlock code. If they do not enter that unlock code in, it erases all the data that's on the drive. All right. From when I was researching this, as of around May 19th or so, it was still sort of in a testing stage. So something to keep an eye out for. But if we think about the impact here, the potential impact, two big things that stood out for me. Number one, with no clear disclosure how to find an unlock code. 10 minutes is not a lot of time for anything. Now, 10 minutes is not a lot of time to go out there, do the necessaries to get you an account, get the money transferred over, and decrypt your data. Much less this, you're trying to start from scratch and figure out an unlock code in 10 minutes time. The majority of people, you're just going to be out of luck. But what was really of a concern for me was that if you magnify this, let's say something like this was to spread around using like Eternal Blue and Double Pulsar, like we saw with WannaCry. If this was to hit a network, a corporate network, it could be potentially devastating, especially if their backups are not up to date and so on, because there's no way that an administrator is going to be able to get around to really even one of these machines in time to be able to take any kind of preventive or remediation steps. If you have this start to spread around the entire network, it could be a disaster. I mean, you're talking about a lot of downtime potentially. So where does Adaptive Defense 360 match up versus Stalin Locker? Well, currently Stalin Locker is detected by Panda signature files, the versions that we have. So any computer that's updated with signatures is going to be safe. And this includes our endpoint protection machines, Adaptive Defense 360 machines, Endpoint Protection Plus. Out of that, let's say if we had never seen this before, and this is assuming a couple things, Adaptive Defense would be able to prevent the entry of any new variants of the malware. So there's variables in there like the delivery method, what way they're trying to get into the machine. Most likely with the ransomware, it's going to be coming through as an attachment in email, requiring a little bit of social engineering. Somebody's going to have to execute it and launch it. And we would be able to shut that down. Even if this was brand new, we'd never seen it before, nobody had seen it before, we would be able to protect the machines from this. And at the end, like we say here, while the consequences are concerning, we want to get you to the point of focusing on sort of the mechanism. With the protections that we've talked about, what this is essentially is an executable that is trying to launch. Don't think of, oh man, this is an executable that is trying to delete all my data. Forget that part of it. Remember, this is a binary file. This is an executable that is trying to launch in order to conduct its activities. So that's the key point right there. The next one that we want to talk about is called Vega Stealer. You may have heard about this a little bit in the news recently. This is actually something that was discovered by Proofpoint. And this is kind of a credential stealer. We used to see a lot more of these in this format. But this is something that is sent via email, and it has a Word doc attachment, and that Word doc contains a macro inside of it. That macro inside of the Word document pulls down a PowerShell script. PowerShell script in turn retrieves the executable, which is Vega Stealer, which then turns around and steals credentials from Firefox and from Chrome. This particular one would actually target individuals as far as email addresses are concerned. So it's going out to specific email addresses, but a neat trick that it's also doing is also sending itself out to distribution lists. And what happens when you send it to a distribution list? You potentially magnify or amplify your reach. If you have an email address, a distribution list, info@mydomain.com, so you may have 10 people associated to that distribution list, they're all going to get the same email. So it really kind of amplifies that attack. Now, along with stealing the saved credentials and credit cards from Firefox and Chrome, this also goes a little bit further. It gets into stealing sensitive documents. So it does start to scan the drive looking for a particular data file extensions and transferring those out. So as we said before, Vega Stealer is a relatively common info stealer. We used to see a lot of these, you see sort of man-in-the-middle things where they're trying to watch bank pages, and if they ever noticed a bank URL load, they would steal credentials in that form. So pretty common on that scale. There's actually multiple points of capture in the attack, some in your domain, some in our domain. So the first one is going to be social engineering. As we said, it comes through as an email with a Word doc attachment. So part of that is good user education. If you don't know the person it's coming from, or you're not expecting anything from them, or you see a weird attachment on it, just don't execute it, don't run it. So that would be step one. The second part was the macros that are involved in Word. Now, this is kind of double domain, if I will, a little bit of your ability to control and our ability to control as well. This is one of those areas where anti-exploit protection is going to come into play. If we see a Word document that's utilizing a macro, and that macro is reaching out to unusual IP addresses to pull down a PowerShell script, that's going to be a big red flag for us. And we're going to be able to lock down Word when we come across that. So that would be kind of one of the first points of capture for us. The URL connections, that's going to play into there as well. As this develops, as it moves along, if they keep trying to utilize it, they're never changing CNC addresses and things like that. That sort of information gets into additional protections, web control and things of that nature. The PowerShell execution is going to be another factor that's going to trigger our anti-exploit protection. Having PowerShell script actually reach out and go to a particular URL and try to pull down a binary file from there, it's likely going to trigger our anti-exploit protection and get locked down at that point as well. And then finally, the binary download and execution. Remember, the same mechanism as Stalin Locker. This is a binary file that is trying to execute, so it can go in there and steal credit card information, passwords, and also seek out sensitive data. So you have that executable file trying to launch. Adaptive Defense 360 kicks in at this point, and it goes through the classification phase. Have we ever seen this file before? Well, no, we haven't. All right, well, it's not going to run until we can get a classification on it. Inevitably, it's going to come back for sure this malware. And then lastly, there's also the data access capture point. We currently monitor over 200 different data file formats for this, so we're able to watch this. So that's another point that would be triggered. There's another side of this, but I don't want to reveal it just yet. There's another little piece of this that comes into play. We're going to kind of see this towards the end, and we'll talk about that as well. All right, our next one up is Windstar NSSM Miner. And matter of fact, we'll have to sit in remote areas, so we kind of had to do a little bit, as best as we could with a little bit of this. But essentially, this is a crypto miner that mines Monero cryptocurrency. And part of the way that it does this is once it gets on the machine is it tries to launch two service hosts.exe and also tries, and the next part is kind of interesting. It sets the attributes of those processes to be. I say that as interesting because it's kind of a first step or a new step into sort of protective measures for crypto miners. You know, we had seen a lot of sort of very vanilla stuff out there, like we said before, cryptojacking with things like CoinHive and so on, or just dropping crypto miners on a machine and just letting them sit there and run. But we're going into that little next step here where they're actually saying, okay, there's a potential that these security companies are going to come along and try to shut me down, so I need to take steps to preserve myself. So that part was interesting there. By the way, the crash doesn't damage the machine. A reboot is going to, bring it right back to where you were. All it does is it tries to prevent the removal from the device. Now, this particular variant has already earned approximately $28,000 so far. So it's been relatively successful, and it's gained a little bit of money for the creators. As far as how Windstar matches up against AD360, again, with this one, we've run into a couple of different possible capture points. Number one is the delivery mechanism. There wasn't a lot revealed about that in particular, so we don't know if there was a script involved that downloaded it like we saw before with Vegas Dealer, if it came through email or so on, or if it was kind of a living off the land approach, which we'll discuss here shortly. But typically that delivery method is going to be an initial point of capture there. They try to execute that process on the machine to create the two new service hosts, which also are going to get analyzed as well. And the injection attempts, the anti-exploit protection is going to be taking a look at that as well. So you got a lot of possible capture points there with this one. Something important to mention with this one is that all the damage is post-infection. So prevention is always the key. So if we can get to that executable as it tries to launch, then no problems. The current iteration of this is currently detected by Panda signature files. So again, even our base model, endpoint protection is going to be protected against this particular strain. So that covers some of the the current trends or current threats that we wanted to talk about. But moving on, we want to start taking a look at some developing trends. And we really wanted you to kind of focus on this area because when we talk about current threats, we don't want to really get very myopic, because if we're talking about current threats, any given point in time, you may be talking about 5 or 6 different variants. And that's kind of not where we want our focus to be. Remember, from previous webinars, we see probably about 220,000 new variants every single day. So going through and kind of cherry picking 3 to 5 to 6 to 10, even if you did 20, it's going to give you a very short-term kind of fuzzy feeling that everything is a-okay. We want you to start focusing on developing trends. We want you to start looking at the mechanisms and taking a look at the model that you're using to see how that matches up, rather than focusing so much on existing threats. Time to time, there are going to be ones that are going to be incredibly important. Bad Rabbit, WannaCry, those were definitely relevant. And when that happens, I mean, you'll absolutely be hearing from us in webinars. So, developing trends. The return of the ninjas is the first one. So the return of the ninjas very simply means it's a return to being quiet and focusing on making money. We were in this phase before. Remember, we talked about it. Sort of one of the streams of evolution throughout this industry has been, we started off being a little bit noisy. Hey, look what I can do. I'm spreading all around. I'm leaving nice little notes in my code saying why I did things. And then money came into play, and we started being a little bit more quiet and trying to hide ourselves and just make as much money as we can. Well, then bang, ransomware jumps on the scene. Ransomware was very much in your face. You knew about it. It was painful. And then after that, we're starting to slide back into things like crypto mining, where we're hiding on the machine. We're trying to make ourselves known as little as possible because we want to stay there as long as we can and make as much money as possible. As we said, ransomware was a loud deviation kind of from that silent persistence, but that little ransomware frat party seems to be winding down. We mentioned this in the crypto mining webinar last month. The statistics seem to indicate, and not just from us, you'll see this from a lot of different vendors, is that ransomware infections seem to be dropping. And that's because people are starting to move over into that crypto. The return, as we say here, to that silent approach is evident in the growth of cryptojacking and focus on crypto mining and standard tools, which we'll talk about here shortly. The next trend, and this is really sort of a subset of kind of a return of the ninjas, is sort of a living off the land or fileless. It's a lot of this, and you're going to hear a lot of semantic debate around this. Are fileless attacks truly fileless? Well, when I say fileless, I only mean not malware, or I only mean no files at all. And when I say living off the land, it only means system tools or this or that. Living off the land and fileless attacks is not a new phenomenon. It's not something that has just popped on the scene and we're like, oh, we're all caught unaware. It's a return to one. This is the way to generally saying. We're talking about things like pure memory attacks. If you remember the Target breach, you had the card numbers. Attacks using common tools, things like PS exec, things along those lines. Script-based attacks, registry resident attacks. Those are really pretty slick. I forget the botnet that was doing it, but what this particular botnet would do would load itself into memory and delete the file off the disk and delete itself out of the registry. And it would monitor the shutdown of the machine. So if the machine got a shutdown call, it would write itself back into the registry so it could persist on reboot, and then write itself to the disk. Whenever the machine rebooted, it would load itself off the disk into memory and then delete that file on disk and delete the registry entry so it could persist there silently. We're also talking about protections. WMI exploitation, we're seeing a little bit of a takeoff in this, and that's when management is using land tools or system tools and things of that nature, and end up what they're really trying to do is get to that payload, which is a binary file, and deliver it. Part of the questions around why are we seeing this? Why are this living off the land and fileless attacks? I think there's a lot of different reasons. One of the ones that I've seen tossed about is that very simply vulnerabilities and exploits are starting to become expensive. And why? Well, you have a lot of vendors now that are doing bug bounties. So vendors are actually going out there and saying, if you find vulnerabilities in our product, let us know. We will pay you for them. There are companies out there that actually will crowdsource bug hunters for you in your own bug bounty program. So you crowdsource these people. They go and they take a look at your network or whatever that may be, and whatever they find, you pay them for. That's one reason. Um, the others, I think the protections are just starting to tighten down on them. You're getting things like execution control. You're looking at behaviors. You're able to cover the fileless attacks, the exploits, and everything of that nature. So I think it's getting a little bit harder and harder to sort of develop these things to some extent. So they're kind of going back to natural usage of system tools. So when it comes to fileless attacks or living off the land versus AD360, how do we fit into that? Well, it's to be honest with you, it's a little bit difficult, because you're trying to take two different contexts and kind of shove them together with this, because we're talking about a broad range of things. There's a lot of different bases to cover. Are we talking about process injections? Are we talking about utilization of the system tools and so on? Some are covered with traditional protections. You have things like memory protection that's been around for ages. Things that look for buffer overflows or what they call address space layout randomization, things of that nature. So some of that is going to be protected against or by the traditional protections. And some of them require a step beyond just process classification. If legitimate tools are used, we can classify PowerShell all day long. Somebody tries to maliciously use it, we need to have something in place to be able to analyze and stop that. Our anti-exploit protection is going to monitor those applications. We do that against a global baseline. Panda is a global product. We have this installed around the world. So we monitor that baseline with those applications. We're able to see variations and anomalies in that and able to shut those down really effectively. As a matter of fact, we've stopped abuses related to PowerShell. We've stopped abuses related to WMI, RMM compromises, and more. We'll talk about how in just a second. But on the other side of that, the process classification is there as well. So, we have the traditional protections in there. We have the anti-exploits. So when they're trying to do the living off the land, but we also get to that point when the payload delivery comes, that's when the process classification comes into play. Something tries to deliver and load on the machine, adaptive defense is going to be able to block that. So we're covering that almost entire attack chain for you, being able to shut it down at multiple points along the way. So now our next exciting topic is the XFactor, and just what is that? We've talked about a lot. Let's rehash a little bit before we get into this. We've talked about a lot about what goes into Adaptive Defense 360. It's the managed service, there's process classification, there's anti-exploit protection. You also have the traditional protection in there. You have the intelligence that's wrapped up in the advanced visualization tool, so on. So you've got a lot of things in there. We've seen in this presentation a couple of different ways where Adaptive Defense 360 can also go in and intercept these threats. That isn't traditional with the old way, with old antivirus, signature-based antivirus. So you've got a lot of functionality that's built in there. And even still beyond that, we bring along the XFactor, which is what we call Panda THIS. And what does that stand for? Threat Hunting Investigative Services. So the important part to understand about that is the threat hunting. And this is something you may have heard of recently, maybe looking into or trying to build teams on your own. But what is it? Essentially, threat hunting is where you have a dedicated staff of people that are looking through a lot of telemetry. It could be logs, live data, so on. They're looking for anomalies. They're looking for attack patterns. They may be triggering on signatures of previously known attack patterns, or just things that are anomalous, for lack of a better word. Using those researchers, they're able to get in and see what it is that our attackers are doing. What are they trying to compromise? They may be able to go in and harden applications, harden the perimeter, so on and so forth. Panda has put this service into effect. We have threat hunters that are actively monitoring customer environment. Not just the stuff that's coming up on our screen that says, hey, well, we blocked this file, we classified this file, but far beyond that. We mentioned all the monitoring that we're able to do. You have threat analysts that are going through, they're acting off alerts, but they're also going through proactively and looking through application behavior, things of that nature for anomalies in there that may be indicators of a compromise. What's incredible about this is that that's absolutely unheard of. This service is separately. You may buy the product from a company. They may offer this service, but you have to buy it on licenses. Or this is something you go out to another company, set up a SOC, and I want you guys to monitor all the data that's coming through here. I want you to look for threats and anomalies. I'm going to pay you X amount of dollars. We are currently the only vendor that is offering this in the base price Adaptive 360 product. If you're buying Adaptive Defense 360, there's nothing special that you have to do. You don't have to request it. It's going on. To date, we've helped customers identify a couple of different instances, attack chains that have compromised remote management utilities. We had one scenario where we were able to say, look, looks like somebody is utilizing the product that you're using to go out and remotely manage and support your customers. So they probably compromised your credentials. You need to go in and you need to set that straight. Meanwhile, we blocked everything else for you. Also, WMI exploitations, which was pretty crafty. PowerShell over and over again. We've seen attempted compromises of that. And network canvassing, going into a network and looking around, querying the machines that are on the network, trying to do password dumps and things of that nature, fingerprinting systems. We've been able to identify all that in multiple situations. So it's something that is very powerful, very effective, and we've been able to use successfully in a lot of different environments. And I think this is going to be a crucial advantage in securing your networks and understanding current attack methods. Remember I said, always keep your eye on that leading edge of what's going on with threats. We're seeing a lot of diversity or innovation with some of the threats. We're going back to that silent mode. We're also seeing sort of that shift back into using system tools. So they're really, really focusing hard again on trying to fly under the radar. So if you're using a traditional AV signature-based protection, it's not going to cut it. Just point blank and period, just not going to cut it. If you're using something like process classification or analysis, it's going to go a long way. But something like this, a threat hunting service, is really going to kind of put you over the top as far as your protections are concerned. Now, there's one correction I'll make with that. I said that if you're using traditional signature AV alone, one of the benefits about endpoint protection and endpoint protection plus with us is that all of this knowledge, all of this understanding, everything that we're doing with our threat hunting services, everything that we're doing with our process classification, all of that understanding and knowledge feeds back into all of our products. So everybody in the Panda universe benefits from the abilities that we're putting forth with this product. So in summary, attacks are going silent again. The painful Band-Aid rip that was inherent with the ransomware is going away. So remember that you won't always know when something has gone wrong. I think we're kind of at a point where this is pretty important. Everybody, ransomware was so painful and it was so in your face. Everybody kind of got used to that. So I think we really need to think about shifting gears quickly here and getting back into being very diligent, being very focused on what's going on in our networks, and not just sitting back waiting to get a notification that somebody's machine got encrypted and kick into overdrive to fix it. There's also a rehash of system tool abuse underway, along with resource killing, cryptojacking at the forefront. These are two of the first leading edges. We're probably going to see a lot more. As those develop, we're going to bring those to you. But silence and persistence will be the buzzwords with all of these. And then without forgetting about bad binaries, you need to make sure that your security keeps an eye on and can take action when the good guys are compromised. These are all things that Adaptive Defense 360 are well suited for, as we've seen today. And with that, we will now set aside a few minutes for everybody to get their questions in, ask anything that you like, and we'll go through and we will answer those in just a couple of minutes here. All right, we got a couple of questions to start out with, so we're just going to jump into those. If you guys have them or you have them as a result of some of the answers that we put forth here, feel free to throw those in. So from Kevin, the question is, can you give a good definition of what a full EDR is and what it does? EDR was something that was sort of put forth by Gartner a few years back, and there's 4 pillars into that. And I'll actually give you, Kevin, some of the slides that define this in detail. But basically, the idea is, being able to have intelligence of what's going on, being able to remediate machines or prevent machines from being infected, and a couple of other different pillars. I'll let them answer that one for you, and I'll send it over in a little bit this afternoon. So can adaptive defense detect and stop code caving or lateral movement across the network? The answer is yes to both of those. And then third, did you mention something about a SOC in the beginning? Can you cover that again? I'm using AD and AD360 as a SOC to offer to my clients. You mentioned something about a SOC a little bit in there, but we were talking about the threat hunting investigative services. Normally that is something that's done in a SOC or by a SOC. So I mentioned it in that regard. And again, Kevin, I'll follow up with you on all of these. We'll go into a little bit more detail on them. If anybody else has any more questions, feel free to throw those in. We'll just give it a couple more minutes. So Patrick asked, can someone or thing shut down AD360? We actually have a feature in there called anti-tamper protection. That is a watchdog for all of the Panda services that are on the machine. So properly enabled and controlled, then the answer is no. Patrick said in relation to our last question, case in point, installed one day, gone the next, and ransomware took over. Right. That was something that, that's been in the sort of the malware toolbox for a long time. Get on the machine and try to see if there is an antivirus or protection on there and try to disable it. Or, if you got access to the machine, even more important, somebody maliciously gets access to the machine, one of the things they're going to do is try to go through and shut down security tools. Yeah, I know the situations, but that's why we have that anti-tamper protection in there and a couple of other features that help to really secure the presence on the machine. And with that, everybody, we are going to go ahead and wrap it up today. My email address is on the screen, so if you didn't get to ask the question that you wanted to, feel free to write that down and then send it over to me. I will be happy to get back with you today, if I can, with an answer. I want to thank you all again for joining, and really appreciate the interaction from last month's webinar that led to this. So if, again, you want to see something more in the future, please let us know, and we'll be on top of it. Thanks once again for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day.